Welcome to the City. I'm Anthony Wilson, the Public Information Officer for the City of San Angelo. And joining us today to talk about the fiscal year 2014-2015 budget is our Finance Director, Tina Bunnell. Tina, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm glad to be here.
Now, I want you to give us, first of all, a little primer on how city budgets work, because I don't think that a lot of people realize that a city budget is actually a collection of a lot of different budgets. Explain how that works.
Okay. In the City of San Angelo, we have 58 separate funds that we account for. They range from very small to very large. The largest fund that we have, of course, is the general fund, which has a budget proposed for the fiscal year 15 budget of just over $62 million. And each of those funds is accounted for separately, and we try to every year budget that balance at either a zero balance budget or it has to have a surplus. We can't, of course, budget at a deficit. So the budget process includes each and every one of those funds meeting with the different directors and managers and getting their ideas on what they need to budget. And so it's a very detailed and thought out process.
So you mentioned about the different types of funds, and we have special revenue funds, we have enterprise funds, and we have the general fund. First, let's talk a little bit about special revenue funds. Explain what a special revenue fund is.
Okay, a special revenue fund is really a fund that cannot be accounted for somewhere else. Can't either be accounted for those revenues within the general fund or in an enterprise fund. And so an example of a special revenue fund would be, a grant fund like the CBDG grants, or the civic events fund where we account for the hotel occupancy taxes. We have to keep those things separated and account for them because they're either restricted by a grant or law or something like that.
And typically the operations in the special revenue funds have a whole lot of different revenue streams that may be coming to them, whether it's earned revenue or some sort of tax or grant or some other type of revenue.
Right, that's correct. But again, the key there is that they can only, that money and that revenue from whatever source it is can only be spent for the purpose intended. And so that's why we keep it in a separate fund, so that we can ensure that we're accounting for it properly, that it's being spent in accordance with either the grant or the restriction or whatever that requirement is.
Now, we talked about special revenue funds. What about an enterprise fund? Explain what that is.
Okay, an enterprise fund is really supposed to be self-supporting. It operates really like a business would. And so any charges for services or fees that are incorporated therein should sustain the fund so that it can stand on its own without any help from the general fund or somewhere else.
And so give us an example of an enterprise fund here within the city.
The water fund, the airport fund, those are all areas where we either have charges for services or grants or some other revenue source that should sustain that fund on its own. So.
And of course, the portion of the budget that gets the most attention is our general fund.
Of course.
Explain why that is.
Well, like I said earlier, the general fund is where we account for most of the operations of the city. It is just almost half of our entire city budget for the year. And so we account for things like public safety, parks, operations, street maintenance, those kind of things are accounted for within the general fund. Another reason it gets a lot of attention, of course, is because it is supported by property tax and sales tax, which are, I guess the bulk of the general fund revenues rests on taxes. And so that's, I think, why it draws a lot of attention from a lot of people.
So right now, as we're taping this, we are in the midst or at the tail end of the fiscal year 2014 budget. What is the general fund amount in the current budget?
The current budget is just over $57 million in the general fund. And so again, like I said, we're proposing just over $62 million for fiscal year 15, and it's an increase of about, I think, just over $5 million, like $5.3 million.
And so what's accounting for that increase in the general fund budget?
Mostly it's property tax revenue. Our property tax base increased this year by about $370 million. So that enabled us to raise a little bit more money through property tax revenue. Now the property tax rate is going to stay the same, but the increased tax base, that's the value of the properties, did increase. And so that increased our general fund property tax revenue by about $2.5 million in the proposed budget. So, and then of course the other increase would be the sales tax revenue. We did project an increase in that as well. Really conservatively, the amount that we projected, a 12% increase. We projected that because we'll hit that this year. And so that's an increase not over what we actually received this year. It's an increase over what we budgeted last year, not knowing, where we would end up at the end of this fiscal year.
Well, talk about that a little bit. When you're projecting your property tax increase, that's easy to figure out because you just simply apply the tax rate to the property values that we have for the city.
Right.
But projecting sales tax is a much trickier way of approaching and budgeting revenue. How do you go about deciding how much you're going to budget when it comes to sales tax collections?
Well, it's really based on trend that we see. This year being completely different from last year because our sales tax revenue was up quite a bit. We really looked at the first 9 months of this fiscal year and then the last 3 months of the previous fiscal year and try to get an idea of where we think we'll end up for this year. And so when we did that, really 12% was pretty conservative. So that's just the kind of things that we look at for sales tax. It is a little trickier, but we feel comfortable in what we're projecting and that it's still conservative and that we'll still hit our marks. So.
Of course, the thing that people seem to pay most attention to each year are their property taxes and how much they're paying on the property that they own. One of the misconceptions out there, or misperceptions, is that the city actually sets property owners' property values. Explain how that actually works.
Okay, so we actually contract with the Tom Green County Appraisal District, and they actually set the valuations on all of the properties. And we save money that way because they also set the property values for the school district and the county and other entities within our general area. It's really the most economically efficient way to value the properties. Also, of course, it's a third party, and so we're completely separated from valuing the property and then also charging a tax rate on it. So the appraisal district sets the values, and then the city sets the tax rate. And so it's disjointed. There's no connection there. So once we get the values from the county, that's what we base our property tax projections on.
And remind us again, how much did the certified tax rolls increase this year?
By about $370 million. Of course, that's before any exemptions and that kind of thing. And so, but that did yield, like I said, an additional $2.5 million in property tax revenue.
And I know your boss, our assistant city manager and CFO, Michael Dane, says he has not seen it grow that much in his time here in San Angelo. What is that growth attributed to?
It's hard to say. I think that the county really, the appraisal district really did a city and county-wide reappraisal process this year. And so some properties that hadn't been revalued or appropriately valued in the past, I think that they increased some of those values this year that attributed to part of it. Again, it has nothing to do with the tax rate or anything like that. It's just strictly property values and the increase in the value of the properties. So
you mentioned the tax rate, and of course, right now our tax rate is 77.6 cents per $100 of value on a piece of property. That's the lowest it's been in 23 years. And the City Council has indicated that they plan to keep that same rate for this coming year. What have they said about why they want to keep that rate where it is right now?
Well, I don't want to put words in their mouths, but I think a lot of the reason is that with the increase in property value, we're finally able to address some issues that the city's been having for quite a long time. Things like streets. We were able to cover a lot of expenditures that have just really been ignored in the budget process in the past, not because we weren't aware, but because there simply wasn't the funding to cover those things. And so I think that's why I think that we're in a good place right now. I think that we can get some things into the budget that have needed to have been there for quite a while now, and get them covered. We were able to add about $2.2 million for street maintenance this year, which brings us up to $3.9 million total, and so that puts us on an 8-year process or cycle for streets. And so I think the opportunity to do things like that, and we know that of course you're aware that was one of the council's top priorities during their retreat this year. And so the fact that we're able to cover some things like that we've had goals of doing for a long time, I think that's probably the main reason. Like I said, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but that's what I would think would be the reason for that. But.
Well, and the other thing that they seem to be interested in addressing, and that some of that extra revenue is going to address, are pay raises for city employees so that we can attract and retain high-quality employees.
That's right, and it's been, I know any business owner in the city would probably agree with that. That's really difficult to not only recruit, but to retain employees right now in the economic situation that we're in. And so we were able to put, for the general fund, about $1.9 million in there for raises for city employees. That includes an amount for meet and confer as well in there for the police department. And then about $600,000, we increased the budgets in other funds, all of the other funds combined. So we feel like that'll go a long way toward getting us closer to the goal. One of the council's goals in the retreat was also salaries. And so we're trying to get to a point where we're at least coming close to our benchmark cities, and I feel like that'll take us in that direction.
Much has been made of the fact that the City of San Angelo's property tax rate is higher than that of many other municipalities. At 77.6 cents per $100 of value, San Angelo's property tax rate is the lowest it's been in 23 years. Even so, it's true that's more than the rates in Abilene, Midland, Odessa, and Wichita Falls. The reasons for that are fourfold. 1. The average value of a homestead in San Angelo is lower than in other cities. Thus, a higher rate is needed to generate a comparable amount of tax revenue. In San Angelo, the average home is valued at $110,301. That compares to nearly $112,000 in Wichita Falls, more than $140,000 in Odessa, and an impressive $208,000 in Midland. 2. The City of San Angelo offers a 20% tax exemption on a homestead. That means a primary residence is taxed at only 80% of its value. Abilene exempts 15% of a homestead's value, while Wichita Falls offers a straight $18,000 exemption. On an average valued home, San Angelo's exemption would be $4,000 more than Wichita Falls's would be. 3. San Angelo lacks a significant commercial and industrial tax base. That shifts more of the burden of funding local government to homeowners. The City of San Angelo's total taxable value is $4.2 billion. That is dwarfed by Midland's $10.2 billion, Abilene's $8.7 billion, Odessa's $6.1 billion, and Wichita Falls's $4.6 billion. Although Midland's tax rate is nearly 36 cents lower than San Angelo's, Midland generates $10 million more in property tax revenue. So again, with a lower tax base, San Angelo requires a higher rate to generate a comparable amount of tax revenue. Lastly, San Angelo collects less sales tax than its peers. That means the city must rely more heavily on property taxes to fund its operations. In the coming year, the City of San Angelo has budgeted $26.7 million in total sales tax collections for the General Fund and the Development Corporation. That represents an increase of about 12%. But that's well below the $30.6 million that Abilene is projecting, the $30.8 million Wichita Falls is budgeting, and the $32.5 million Odessa expects to collect in 2015. Each of those factors contributes to a property tax rate that is higher than that of comparable cities. Lost in the discussion of San Angelo's tax rate is what's most important to taxpayers. That is, how much does the homeowner pay in property taxes? San Angelo homeowners, on average, pay less property taxes, or a comparable amount, than do taxpayers in our benchmark cities. In 2015, the average San Angelo homeowner will pay $685 in city property taxes. That's less than the $734 tax bill in Wichita Falls and Midland's average levy of $872. Odessans will pay $534. But again, Odessa will collect nearly $6 million more in sales tax than San Angelo will. A thriving local economy and real estate market have afforded the City of San Angelo the good fortune to finally address some critical needs. That's especially true of water, streets, and adequately paying firefighters, police officers, and other public servants. The city's leadership remains steadfastly vigilant in ensuring that maximum value is squeezed from every tax dollar, never losing sight of the fact that those dollars belong to you. Welcome back to the city. We are continuing our conversation with our Finance Director, Tina Bunnell, over the 2014-2015 budget, which takes effect on October the 1st. And we've been talking about the general fund, which is the portion of the city budget that is funded through our sales and our property taxes. And I wanted you to share a few interesting details about the general fund, because I don't think that people realize how much of the general fund is spent on fire and police protection.
It's just over 50% that we spend on public safety.
And how does that compare to a department, say like operations, which is responsible for our park maintenance and our street maintenance and traffic signals and the like?
About 10% of the general fund budget goes toward those operating expenditures.
So the public and fire safety, I almost dropped this. Our public and fire safety, which of course are base city services that everyone expects, accounts for about half of what sales and property taxes support.
That's right.
Now, does the amount of money generated by our property taxes exceed the cost of the expenses of our police and fire departments?
Well, the property tax generates about 45% of our general fund revenue. And so, like I said, the expenditures of the general fund for police and fire safety are 50% of the total expenditures. And so there is a gap there. I think when we initially implemented the property tax, we were probably covering at least the public safety aspect, but we've grown so much that now that expenditure, that portion of the expenditures exceeds what we actually bring in from property tax revenue.
And how much of the general fund is spent on personnel, that is payroll and benefits?
It's about 71% in the proposed budget.
So for folks who may think that the city spends too much and we should be significantly cutting expenses, that would in essence involve cutting some of the city's workforce, correct?
More than likely, yes, that would have to be the case.
And with police and fire being the bulk of that workforce, and that would actually mean losing some of our police officers and firefighters.
That is a fair statement, I would think, yes.
You know, some folks like to point out that San Angelo's property tax rate is higher than that of some other communities when they compare us to, say, Midland and Abilene and Odessa and Wichita Falls, comparably sized and located communities. Why is it that San Angelo's tax rate is higher than we see in some of the other communities?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. For one thing, we have a much smaller tax base. Especially when you compare our commercial or industrial, properties with those of those other cities like Abilene, Odessa, Wichita Falls. The bulk of our property tax burden lays on the residential properties because we don't have those industrial type properties. And so, also, there's just a lot of things. We can't rely on our sales tax as much because we get 1 cent of our sales tax goes to the general fund. 1% of the sales tax goes to the general fund. And so a lot of those other cities, excluding Odessa, Abilene, Midland, and Wichita Falls, actually are able to pull in 1.5% of their sales tax. And so that's one of the differences. There's just, it's really a combination of things, but I think the main thing is probably the tax base in itself. It's just not as diverse and it's not as large as those other cities.
So let me make sure I understand. So we don't have a big business or industrial tax base that sort of relieves some of the burden on the residential homeowners.
Right.
And so the residential taxpayer ends up making up some of that difference.
Right.
And at the same time, we don't have nearly the economic activity in our community that we might see
That's
in
right.
Midland.
You think about all those other cities that we mentioned. All of them except Wichita Falls have an interstate running through them. And so they see a lot more. You wouldn't think that makes that big of a difference, but it really does. Just the traffic coming through and stopping there because you're on the interstate, even that makes a difference. And so they're able to rely a lot more on the sales tax and then take the burden off of the taxpayer and, keep that tax rate a little bit lower.
And of course, we've seen economic growth here in San Angelo, but
Right.
It's not nearly what our neighbors in Midland and Odessa are experiencing, which is actually good in a way.
Right, yeah. There are pros and cons for both sides of it.
It just
so.
makes it a little bit more manageable to manage your expenses when you don't have runaway growth that also carries with it some runaway expenses.
That's exactly right.
So you joined the city as the finance director during the onset of last year's budget process. How do you think being involved in last year's budget process has helped you in guiding the budget process this year?
Well, I'm thankful to have had an extensive background before as a CPA and an auditor. So I did have knowledge of, how municipalities work, the financial statements, budgets, all of that. I had a general understanding, of course, and a pretty broad one. But going through the budget process last year, I would say the main things that I learned and took away were, just all the state regulations and laws and just how cumbersome the budget process is. It takes us a good part of the year. We start back in April with the departments, and so it's really a long and drawn out process. And so I think just having that first year of experience was eye-opening for me. Also just working with the different departments and directors and learning what really all the needs are for the city, and trying to find a way to use what we have to get the best, bang for our buck with the budgets.
And while I know it's always an arduous process, at least in my experience, my 7 years with the city, this has actually been the easiest of the budgets that I can recall. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's been a little bit easier this year?
I would say just, the fact that we actually have a little bit of the pressure alleviated through the increased property tax and sales tax revenues. I feel like we're in a place where we can actually get some things done and take care of some business that will increase the value that we're able to provide to our taxpayers.
And so when you look at how much the budget is, the proposed budget is for 2015 versus 2014, what's the differences there?
In the revenues?
Just in the city budget as a whole.
The main increases in expenditures, of course, like we said, were the money that we allocated for street maintenance. That was a top council priority, just after water, of course. And then salaries were another big one. And then the third biggest item at about, $1.3 million, I think we were able to allocate for those things that I said earlier that we've not been able to cover in previous years, and that we know we're going to have to pay those expenses, but we just didn't have the additional revenues there to do that. And so I think that, again, I think we're in a really good spot this year, and so I'm really excited about it.
As you mentioned, prior to joining the city, you worked as a CPA and you conducted audits of local governments, including municipalities and school districts. How do you think that experience has helped you in overseeing the city of San Angelo's budget?
Oh, well, it's been a tremendous help. Governmental accounting is so very different from public sector accounting, in that, the fund accounting and the fact that you have to have a budget and you have to abide by your budget. I mean, businesses have budgets, but, they should abide by them, but it's not like law. You know what I mean? And so just having that knowledge base and understanding how all of the parts work together, from the accounting side to the budget side to the purchasing side. I mean, I have extensive grant experience and purchasing experience as well, contract experience. And so all of those things working together, and having a great broad understanding of how a city financial statement and the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. I mean, I've put those together and written them myself. And so it gave me a great understanding of how everything should work together and how it should look in the end. So.
Now, the CAFR is what us lay people would call the audit,
right.
The financial audit. And this year, the city...
It's the product of the audit. Yeah.
It's the product of the audit. So the city this year received a quote-unquote clean audit. Explain what that means and why it's significant.
A clean audit is what we call in the accounting world an unqualified opinion. And so it means that the city is doing everything in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, that we have the proper controls in place that are operating effectively and efficiently. And so it really gives us comfort, and it should give our taxpayers comfort that we're running the city, at least financially, in the way that it should be run, and that we are accounting for things as they should be accounted for, and that we're really keeping a good eye on, making sure that we're good stewards of our resources. So.
The finance department, the department that you lead, has recently won 2 major accolades. One of those is the Gold Leadership Circle Award from the State Comptroller for financial transparency. Talk a little bit about what's involved in earning that honor and what's important about that.
Well, it's important because the reason that they put that award into place was to recognize cities that are doing a good job of being transparent to their tax base and their taxpayers. We have to have everything on our website in a certain format and in a certain way and for a certain number of years. There's all kinds of things that go into it, but basically it means that we have all of our financial statements, our budgets, our CIP, our check register. That the check register is actually what got us from silver last year to gold this year, and so we have all of those documents online where they can be accessed by anyone who has a question, and we're always open to answer any questions as well if they should arise from once our taxpayers go and view those documents. So.
And I know you have a goal of earning the Platinum Award next year. What would be involved with doing that?
It would be a little bit more work. It involves getting a lot of our debt obligations out onto the website as well, and some additional information that has to do with debt and the issues and stuff like that. So
your budget staff also won the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from the Government Finance Officers Association for its budget document presentation. Right. Talk about why that's a significant accomplishment.
Well, that award just it shows that our budget division is doing a great job of putting together our budget document. There are a lot of things that have to be in there, as far as just statistics that have to do with the city, and all kinds of things. But they're graded pretty strictly, and so we're really proud of our budget division for putting together an award-winning document. Again, you can see it on our website. It's really nice. If you want to go on and review it and let us know if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those.
And I'm going to put in a quick plug for that. If you go to our website, cosatx.us/finance, and you not only have the documents that you've talked about, our capital improvement plan,
right,
and our quarterly investment reports are on there as well.
That's right. And in fact, we're about to we just received a third award this year for our investment policy, and so we're really proud of that as well. As you mentioned, the investment information is on our website, and the CIP, the capital improvement plan, that's a document that we put together every year as well, and it's a 5-year plan that looks out over the horizon of what needs we expect that we'll have as far as bigger projects. They have to be at least $25,000 to go in there. Most of them are usually $100,000 or more, and they're just items that we wouldn't put into the normal budget process that we expect that we would need other sources of funding, such as grants or maybe issuing debt if it's big enough, in the council's discretion, of course. And so that CIP is just kind of a broader picture of needs that we know that we have within the city, and it just gives us a goal and a plan, I guess. So.
We've been talking with Tina Bunnell. She is the Finance Director for the City of San Angelo, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of The City.